Great innovation stories make change possible. Each week on the Innovation Storytellers podcast, I invite innovation leaders to share how they overcame the obstacles to introduce breakthrough ideas to the world through the power of story. I'm featuring guests from Tesla, TD Ameritrade, Corning, Cisco, Bloomberg, and so many more. Listen in to learn how you can tell a more effective innovation story and change the future for the better. Hey everybody, I'm your host, Susan Lindner with Innovation Storytellers. We're uncovering some of the greatest stories from innovators around the world and how they got great products and ideas to finally get to their finish line, whatever that may be. So I'm super inspired today to have really a lifelong innovator on the call with me. And I want to tell you a little bit about his business, Edison Innovations. Now, Edison Innovations is different than some other ideation or innovation companies in that they mine the intuition of crowds to provide smart solutions to address really significant market needs. It uncovers what people would flock to buy if it were available. So that's some pretty important market intelligence if you can get it. Larry McDonald is the founder and CEO who brings the strategic direction, innovation, and vision to the company based on 40 years of marketing experience across multiple industries and services. Larry hosted the world's first online entrepreneurs conference for 10 years. So Larry, thank you so much for joining me today on Innovation Storytellers.
My pleasure, Susan. I'm pleased to be here with you.
Yeah. So tell us how it all began, Larry. How did you get into this wacky world of innovation?
I think it's more a question of how I might get out, because I've always been in it. Ever since I've been a little kid, I was always looking at why things were going the way they were and what was wrong with things. I was the poster child for ADD back in the elementary school before they even knew it existed. I was asking the teachers, why? Why?
Mm-hmm. And so that why translated into the why does it work? How does it work? All those other components that actually take you in this inquisitive mindset, right? This inquisitive mode.
Yes. The mode is something that doesn't really turn off very well. It's kind of always on. I mean, many people will walk down the street and look over a puddle and may step over it without a second thought. And then there are those of us who wonder why they built the sidewalk that way to begin with. And it's a curse and a blessing.
You know, it's funny. I remember, I'm going to struggle to remember the name of the artist, but it was an African-American artist in the 1920s in Harlem. And he was talking about looking down at a puddle. And he said something very similar. He said, people step over puddles and don't really give it a second thought. Maybe a child decides to jump and play in it. But I sat there looking on the oil slick that collected on the surface of that puddle and looked at all the beautiful colors and shapes that were coming off of it and felt immediately inspired to paint it. And isn't it amazing, right? How all of us, this is just, the rainbow that is humanity, that we all have our very special and unique gifts that we come to the planet with, of looking at even something like a puddle, and we all see it through the different facets of the diamond, right? Few of us share the same facet. So fascinating. Thank you. So Larry, you've worked on some incredible innovations over the course of your career. Can you tell us about some of those?
Well, lots of different things in all sorts of areas, as you might say. Everything from manufacturing plastics to working with executive search. Strangely enough, my best efforts there were to work with people and they'd leave a meeting going, God, I never know I could do that.
What?
Well, I could be talking to somebody who wanted to be a sales manager, but all he really loved to do was ski. And it never occurred to him that he could be a sales manager for a chain of ski lodges.
Interesting.
Sounds pretty trivial right now, but way back when it was a little more diverse thinking. That's not the best example.
Well, that's okay. So, you came from an innovation culture, right? Doing engineering at Stanford, and then you moved your way into an assortment. I mean, you've really been working on helping companies and helping individuals figure out what is that perfect cross section between what the crowd wants and what we're able to produce, and really to figure out that amazing go-to-market opportunity, right?
We don't really look for what the crowd wants. We look for what they don't want. And then we use that as a flashlight to shine on a problem. Everybody sort of knows what everybody wants, but they really don't. If you ask somebody what they want invented, they're completely nonplussed because they can't imagine what doesn't exist. I think Steve Jobs said something, in fact, don't ask anybody what they want, they don't know. Just look at the materials out there, what they're doing. My attitude is more something around market gap analysis, which looks at where are the opportunities where the demand is greater than the supply. And this is revealed by asking people what they don't like.
So what's an example of that?
Sure. Let's say, and it works in any time slot, for example. You could say, okay, give me, let's beam into somebody's brain that's a 30-year-old woman who is waking up. And what are the little pains and frustrations she has? Well, it might be everything from making the bed to knocking the alarm off the desk to figuring out where her kids are going to be that day and what clothing they need. And by the way, how is she going to do the laundry when she gets back from school or from work? And how are we going to prepare for dinner? What ingredients do I have? What ingredients do I need to pick up? It just goes on. There's a huge, huge list. And each one of those you could look at and say, wow, if I could solve that one problem, would that be a $50, $100 million business? And over time, and collecting maybe 8 or 10,000 of those, you'll find ones that when you ask yourself that question, you'll go, oh, it absolutely would be. Just based on my intuition, looking at the market, I know that there are enough people out there that would like that solution. And then you can ask yourself, well, is there existing demand? And that's the key, in my opinion, the existing demand for whatever it is you're thinking about doing. Is it so intense that somebody will grab it out of your hand and replace it with a $100 bill?
And what would an example of that be? Like, what comes to mind of something that is like we didn't know we wanted necessarily. We just knew that we needed either the problem solved, or maybe we didn't even know we had a problem.
Sure. Well, the biggest and most obvious is iPhones. And we didn't need them. In fact, everybody suggests that as the good example of why you can't anticipate the demand for something that doesn't exist. But the truth of the matter is, everybody had MP3 players, but nobody had looked at the pains that go with them. How do I get my music on it? How do I select music? What else can I do with this device? How do I get my entire record collection in my pocket and take it with me wherever I want to go? So all successful products have fallen into this category where somebody said, wow, black and white TV, I really want something with color on. There's got to be a way we can do that.
Yeah. So, I mean, those are historical, right? So those successes have been proven. What's something that's a little bit more like maybe, things that you've seen that are a little bit further along that don't seem, so blockbuster-ish, and yet, I often use the example on this show of my 94-year-old mom. And I ask her, what is the greatest innovation of all time? And she says, dishwasher pods. And I was okay. Like, she has lived through the advent of, radio, television, cable, computers, internet, all of it. Her favorite, dishwasher pods. And I was like, and I asked her, not the dishwasher itself. And she says, no, it's just a box with water in it. That's fine. I get it. She said, but the reliability, the promise delivered is actually what is the greatest innovation, that it actually works, that I don't have to come over to the dishwasher with disappointment or fear that what I want didn't get done. If you didn't give me a dishwasher, I'd be happy to wash my dishes. But if you promise me they're going to be washed and cleaned, that's what I want. And so it solves a whole different question of not just whether or not the dishes are clean. It's the reliability of the process that is
integrity.
The integrity of the process that's actually most satisfying for her.
So that can apply to anything. Dependability. How do you rent out your home and know that the person who's renting it is trustworthy? Mm-hmm. So people think Airbnb was this instant invention where somebody said, wow, I've got all this space in my house. I don't know what to do with it. Or isn't it? I hate paying rent on 4 rooms when I only use 2 and I'm only there 3 days a week. There's got to be some better solution. But then somebody had to come along and develop the software to do it, to control it, the way to market it, and more importantly, the way to keep it trustworthy and have high integrity so that people coming into your home, you could trust that they would do something positive rather than negative to it.
That's right. So you've recently been working on a learning platform for kids. Can you tell us about where the idea came from and how it's progressed?
That's really something that's very close to my heart. And finally, it's coming into its time, I think. That is that kids and education have been a challenge to everybody. Khan Academy has built this wonderful collection of videos of Salman Khan writing out the solutions, the problems that kids can watch for an explanation. But they're not kids doing it. And kids really want to watch other kids. They trust their peers and are entertained by it. Plus, kids have a natural inclination to being humorous and fun and a little bit devilish, which is taught out of them. Your earlier example of the puddle with the oil sheen on it, kids would have gotten into that. Not only that, they put the hands in it and wipe it all over their face. But right. Our wonderful teachers have taught them, which is their expectation, to not do that. Pay attention, focus, pay no attention to that puddle, step over it and continue on to our not maybe as compellingly interesting process. So I started looking at it and saying, well, wait a minute, we got hundreds of millions of kids, many of which are on TikTok and video explaining or entertaining. Why not have a contest to encourage them to make the most incredibly interesting, funny, but correct and accurate explanation for every problem in every textbook? So that's what we've kind of been working on.
Yeah. So is this an AI-based platform? Like, where did the idea come from and how are you, because I want to talk a little bit more about this, crowdsource and the crowd thinking about it.
Sure. Well, you can see where the idea came from. I'm just looking at kids in schools and going, that's not working. We're wasting our talent.
Well, it's not to say that one would automatically believe that a crowdsource solution would be the solution to it. I'm sorry, not crowdsource, that peer-to-peer
right.
would be the appropriate.
It actually came to mind about 20 years ago. But at 20 years ago, we didn't have these to make videos. Everybody didn't have a TV studio in their pocket with the editing software on it, where you can change the lighting, where you can add a background with a blue screen. You can add effects that kids will giggle when they see it. You can have an animation that explains how gravity works. It's remarkable what's possible. And I'll just turn on TikTok at any time and just look at it, and you see that they have the most creative people in the world are the ones between maybe 6 and 14. So if you can get the right group together, and there are talent pools all over, you can encourage them to make recordings that can be shared for free, basically, or shared so that the student can make some money on it. And if it's done by a college student who's working at school all day long, but at night has to be flipping pizzas, why not have him tutoring people for $20 an hour?
Yeah. And so how do you begin to test, this idea, whether or not you're really hitting it? I wonder if kids do want a peer-to-peer solution. I wonder if that would work.
I'll use my intuition for that one. The federal government would like you to be able to test that and document it with the most fantastic PhDs in the world before they'll give you any money. But in my opinion, it's pretty common sense that mothers can tell you that their kids would rather play with other kids than do their homework. But if they have a robot kit, if they have a rocket kit they can use to blast off in the neighborhood, they can learn engineering. They can learn pretty much anything. They can learn sociology. They can find out what it's like to be bullied and how to change bullying. They can change virtually anything, and you don't have to really pay them. And they're eager to do it in every country. Can you imagine? Let's see how the French kids do it with dubs, showing the different voices. With open source material, you can change the background. Somebody can make a video, but somebody else could come in and put funny little goggles on them and butterflies flying around and change the music track and put the background in London, in Harry Potter land.
You know, it's interesting because I'm mentoring a startup out of the Ukraine right now, which you can imagine how taxing and how challenging that is in the middle of this war. And the founders are seeking to have created an AI-based peer-to-peer foreign language whereby kids speak, the lessons, and the AI tells them over time what they're getting right and what they're doing wrong, and creates personalized curriculum for each kid.
Okay, that's what they want.
Yeah, well, that's what teachers want, right? Because language learning is so individuated, beyond just learning your native language. And in Europe, many people have multiple languages in their households. And oftentimes your home language is not your school language. And that's the case for a lot of ESL kids here in the United States too, right? We're a country of immigrants. So oftentimes the home language and the school language are not the same. So kids struggle when your school language is your second language. And
when I think about that, the AI side of it, I think about all the times in school where you were sick for 3 days and you missed some key component of that particular program. And for the rest of the year, you're lost. That AI app could keep you on track. It could constantly monitor what you have learned and what you have not learned so that you can relearn the foundational material that you lost while you were out sick.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I felt that way kind of glazed over in math most of my academic career, just going, I need to hear it again. It still hasn't sunk in. This isn't my forte. But the concept of, first off, the hardest part of that innovation was collecting voices of kids, because Google Voice has done a tremendous amount of data collection around all of our adult voices. Mm-hmm. But little kids say things funny. Right. And little kids have funny ways of pronouncing things, and especially when they're challenged with learning another language. So what sounds like, el doctor or el médico, might sound really clear from an adult, but it might sound like el médico from a little kid who's still learning how their mouth and tongue function, right? So really being able to collect that and being able to create something really decisive with it was critical. So where in your process in this platform, and what's it called, by the way, so we can keep an eye out for it?
Well, the tagline at the moment is kids teaching kids.
And what's the product called? So that is the product.
That is the product.
Got you. And so where do you think the greatest part of the innovation lies in it? And what's been the biggest challenge in creating it?
Well, that's a good question. There's so many elements to it. For example, the intellectual property involved would include creating a taxonomy, or actually it's available, of all the various areas. You can use the Common Core, for example. Mm-hmm. There's the issue of how you're going to deliver it, YouTube, the way of how you're going to find sponsors for it. There's lots of organizations that can help in that want to promote engineering or STEM. STEM is the hot button these days, and the best way to intrigue children is with entertaining material about nature, science, technology, engineering. And those are just a few of the elements.
And so these pieces, I mean, given what's already on the market, right, it really is a shift from thinking about Khan Academy for adults to now something similar where children are teaching one another. What do you think the biggest barrier to adoption might be?
Resistance. Friction is the biggest barrier to innovation everywhere.
So what is that friction, though? Because it exists in every market. So what's the friction?
Oh, friction will be parents. I'm scared about what the kids are going to learn if we let them learn their own stuff. Teachers, wow, they're competing with me. I really know this material so much better. Everybody else looking at it and saying, well, who's going to verify it? Well, somebody will verify it. The kids will verify it. When I was in university, at University of the Pacific, I started the faculty evaluation. And the one thing I got from that was incredibly focused and integral evaluations that were, well, you didn't get any of the phony things you see on Yelp and other review systems. You got sincere, detailed, sophisticated evaluations of what a particular teacher was doing. So it created a feedback loop so that the teachers could actually hear what the students were thinking about them. So if you were using Kids Teaching Kids, you'd have the teachers could use it. The teachers could use their students to pick the videos from a group of videos the teachers had already approved for which ones to use in the classroom. That might be different in various communities and states and cultures. And you've also got a situation where home teachers could then subscribe to a package that had particular curricula put together for their interests. Many parents like to impose their interests on their kids. And then you've got just the freebies that can be used anywhere in the world by anybody. So there's a whole melange of opportunities for kids, for packagers, for promoters, for military, for example, could use this. The military is losing a lot of quartermasters, petty officers, sergeants, and they're the ones that know how everything works. Well, why not have them making videos explaining all those things that could just go along as technology? It's what's in people's heads that is really hard to record.
Yeah. And so do you see it as a direct to consumer, or do you see it going through schools? How do you see it?
I'm not sure. The market will tell us.
Yeah. But you have to start somewhere, right? As entrepreneurs, we have to choose a market strategy, go to market strategy.
Right now, the YouTube is full of this sort of thing, but it's not curated. For example, how do you go on and find the best videos on a particular subject? The ones that might appeal to your child the most. You can do it on voting, but voting implies that whoever was there first is going to get the most votes. So you can see how we could have contests. Disney, I think, still does the Best Teachers Awards every year. Something like that for the kids doing it. Academy Awards of Educational Entertainment, edutainment it's called.
So do you think that would be a magnet for you?
Sure. Sure.
So education is one area, but it's certainly not the only area that you've focused on in some of your work. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the innovations that you've worked on?
Well, let's see. We worked on one that was going to be useful for, and by the way, these were tests for our process. So one of the identified pains was, which I described earlier, which is a woman who's making dinner for her family. And it was a project called Honey, What's for Dinner? And the idea was, okay, how do we make it kind of seamless for dinner? So we figured out a system where you could develop recipes. It's an AI solution that you load with the preferences, the food preferences. So-and-so doesn't like peas. So-and-so is allergic to fruits of certain types. You have gluten issues. You have weight control issues. You have, how often do you eat this? Because we all hate it. You have issues of, okay, what's in season? What do they have the most of at the store? So develop a system where you could literally at home on your computer look at a screen and say, okay, pictures of the meals, use those first. And it presents you, just as Netflix presents you with options of its anticipated favorites for you. It looks at that. And then when you go to the store, you can, first of all, you can have it delivered. It comes with instructions of how to cook it, how to mix it. And one of the choices is I need something that can be completed in either an hour or 15 minutes. So the whole thing is programmed out. You can even have a map in the store where this thing is that's keyed into the display system. So it's easy to find stuff. It educates you about the food. You can base it based on, like, how much do you want to lose this year? As far as weight goes, well, we can take 10 calories off of each little thing for you.
Right. You're just responsible for the quantity when you go home to cook it.
Right. Or at some point, you can choose how much to get, whether you get too much or not. You ever say, oh, I want a bag of that, but you would have been happy with a third of the bag. And now you got 2/3 of the bag sitting at home you're going to munch on.
That is, yeah, because it's the desire to not overextend, right? So it's kind of like you're almost doing a walking meal kit through the supermarket, but you still have to come home and cook it.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you could order it cooked. That's Whole Foods will send it out to you, I suppose.
I'm trying to figure out how that, as someone who loves to cook and shop. And I think I'm the only person who actually likes grocery shopping. But, there's also an easy tendency to overindulge. How does one ensure that the weight loss comes about as a result of this? So you buy the product that it's 10 calories less than the one that you typically buy? Or how does that all come into being? Where's the accountability around that idea?
I suppose that's going to have to do with portion control.
Yeah, like anyone's got a handle on that.
Right. Well, think how often you go to Costco and you buy a bag of potato chips that happens to be this big instead of this big. Mm-hmm. And now you've got I can't waste that. There's so many things that you could get small portions of that you would really enjoy, but we're not going to have it lying around to just munch on thinking, oh, I don't want to throw away those potato chips.
And so where the innovation is in getting you to buy smaller, more.
The innovation is in the whole package. The way I look at innovations these days is just like Lego. You're putting different blocks, existing things together in unique ways, almost the way that evolution works with amino acids that change. And we tried this, and now did that work or not?
So, when you think about that approach, like it's incremental, right? It's this kind of blue sky thinking, right? It's like, what do we have? How can we just assemble the blocks differently this time around? Is that a process that you use frequently in the innovations that you work on?
Yeah. I mean, basically, we spend most of our time working on the process, which is based on market gap analysis, which is determining what people want that there's short supply of. In other words, these solutions to pains. So if you've got let's say you have a mosquito in the car as you're driving around, well, you're going to do something about that. You're going to stop, you're going to open the window, you're going to kill it. But let's say you have a headache. Well, now you've got to get off the freeway, go and buy your Tylenol or Advil or whatever it might be. That's a real pain. It's a motivation. So what we look for are the motivating pains.
So can you describe a market gap that you found that, was surprising to you?
There's so many. I mean, we use crowdsourcing technology that asks thousands of people what's annoying them at particular times of the day. And we get back thousands, as you can imagine. We have to go through them and say, well, does this matter? Or in many cases, it's something that exists that they didn't know existed, that they would buy if they knew where to get it or that it even existed. In other things, it's things that can't exist for physics reasons, perpetual motion or or walking in the sky or some crazy thing. But other times it's things that we'd actually go, oh yeah, let's get that. That would be interesting. I'd like to have that. And then we have to ask ourselves, so how much would you like to have it? Because if it's just an incremental thing, well, that's what all the top companies are doing. They're constantly working on incremental improvements, little tweaks. We try and go out of the box and work between the boxes. You've heard out of the box, in the box thinking. But we're looking for in between the boxes that nobody's uncovered yet. That's kind of under a leaf. You have to turn the leaf over and see, wow, there's something under there.
So what did you find when you turned over the leaf? What are some of those things that you found over the years?
Gosh, it's hard to pick a favorite. Let me see if I can figure out. Well, real estate 20 years ago or 30 years ago, we're thinking about videos for real estate. Back then it was, you had to have the truck out there with the cord that went in and the camera on your shoulder. It was that kind of a production. So there was no market for that. There was no demand. So while we get thousands of panes, like my desk is always messy. How do I straighten that out? What do you do with the pens that have no ink in them? What we want to avoid are all the things like, wouldn't it be nice if we put our salt shaker and our pepper shaker, if we epoxied them together so you wouldn't lose one? Isn't that a neat idea? Right. No. But so many ideas are really opinions that people have. And so what we try and do is define which ones are opinions or which ones are possible data-based solutions. So when you ask about what innovations come to mind like that, well, everything that we work on, we look at and say, how could do that? How could we do that differently? How could we have people's gardens grow so they would be unitary? And you see that all these things are popping up now online. The things that we did research on 10 years ago are already, they're everywhere. So you have to be prepared to move quickly.
So I want to ask you some of the hot seat questions that I typically ask my guests, if you don't mind. So if you had to choose the greatest invention ever, the greatest innovation in the history of humanity, what would that be?
To me, it would be two. First one would be democracy. Because that has allowed people to communicate freely. China, countries where that is curtailed, there's a friction in communication, and free communication is so critical. But what really is the main one would be Thomas Edison's Invention laboratory. He built the first research and development laboratory. And the difference there was that back then, the workers, the engineers, whatever you call them, were itinerants. They would go wherever the job was. And then when it was finished, they would disperse, sort of like all the workers on building a house. And Edison brought them all into one place and had them working on lots of different things. So he
collected all the patents for it.
he got that's right. He had like 1,000 patents.
Yeah. And
there's in the United States alone, about $1.5 trillion a year of products are attributable to Edison's inventions of motion pictures, phonographs, high-tech stuff. It was fantastic.
I have been to his workshop in New Jersey, and it is phenomenal. It's just as impressive as you might think. Old-timey impressive, for what it is. Like there's the first sound stage there, and his phonograph recordings, and it's just so impressive. Okay, if you had the opportunity to join any innovation team in history, which team would you join?
I think our team, new team, Edison Innovations, we're not connected to Thomas Edison. There's too many years between us, but we're doing this sort of peer-to-peer innovation concept that he did for the Innovation Factory. Remember, his Innovation Factory was very much like Xerox PARC, which resulted in the mouse and screen, all the things that Apple is based on.
Right. That Xerox had never intended it to be.
Right. So I'm kind of in the right place in the timeline where I want to be.
Mm-hmm.
Probably a little early, always am.
If there's an innovation that you wish would be here on the planet with us right now that hasn't yet been invented, what would that be?
I think an AI application that matches people's thinking and needs to current technologies quickly, because there are so many solutions that nobody knows exists. Kids in particular would deserve to be able to make use of their creativity without having it programmed out of them. Mm. So I'd like to see something along those lines.
Very cool. They
are our smartest minds that are going to do the most for the coming centuries. Yeah. We shouldn't throttle them, so to speak, using 18th and 19th century education principles that just teach them to conform and behave.
Or screen absorption, where they have no time for their own thinking, but they're just constantly in front of a screen.
Right.
Yeah, we need to instill that creativity, and that comes by actually turning things off sometimes.
Yes, it does. It's a combination for sure.
Well, Larry, this has just been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for joining me. So if people want to get in touch with you, how can they best do that?
You can send an email to larry.mcdonald@gmail.com.
There you go. Fantastic. Larry, thank you so much for being on Innovation Storytellers today.
Thank you, Susan.
Did you know that stories are 22 times more likely to be remembered than facts alone? And because of that, leaders have told us that the way we teach storytelling could save them upwards of $100 million. Prioritizing innovation storytelling has never made more sense, and it's why becoming an innovation storyteller is so critical. Don't wait to discover how high the stakes really are. At Innovation Storytellers, our mission is to help you align others around your ideas for change by harnessing the power of strategic communications and inviting people to step into a better future. Visit our website today at innovationstorytellers.com, and we'll teach you the storytelling skills your organization needs to grow, thrive, and create a future that's worthy of all of us. That's innovationstorytellers.com. I can't wait to hear from you.